right. Well, I want to welcome everybody to this webinar as we're talking about justice, mercy, and humility. That great verse from Micah 6:8. And as Mike has often said, following Jesus isn't always easy, but it's not complicated. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. So, joined here with Mike Breaux and Mike Hickerson, Jodi Hickerson. Grateful to have you guys on this. And so for those of you watching this right now and you haven't listened to the podcast, might be great to listen to that first before you watch this. But we're going to dive right into the nuts and bolts of how to do church with the mindset of justice, mercy, humility. And here's where I'm coming at with this. We want that to be part of our lives. We want that to be part of our character. But we also, as church leaders, want that to be part of our church culture. How do you do that with the staff? How do you do that with your church? And how do you lead your church in such a way that it becomes a place that's known for justice, mercy, and humility? And Mike and Jodi, I want to start with you two because at your church, Mission Church, you guys have been around for 7 years, I believe. You've moved from a movie theater into a permanent facility. But that's not even the really cool stuff that you've done. You've done a lot of stuff for your community, starting with movies in the park all the way to assisting during a fire. You talk about justice and mercy, yet done humbly. Just walk us through some of the things that you did in the launch and continuation of the church.
Yeah, I would say I'd love to say we're really great leaders and really strategic, and we had a plan for everything, but that's not how it worked. It was I think probably the best thing that we brought to our community is our willingness to say yes quick when needs arose, and not knowing how we were going to figure it out, but that we were willing to engage into it. So the Thomas Fire happened a year ago, December 5th, and we had our facility had been used as a homeless shelter before because we had just been available and we'd said yes before. So we were able to that night say yes to, if anybody needs to evacuate, we can do this. And then we had empty theaters that people needed things, and people kept trying to drop stuff off at our church. We're like, well, we don't do that, but maybe we will now. And so we ended up becoming, first of all, a shelter in place where people were evacuating. Then we had like just tangible needs that people needed. And then we were like, I think we could leverage our empty theaters that we weren't using for where we could become a distribution center. So once we just said yes, then everybody brought stuff. And so we had personal shoppers, and like our whole community came. We had so much stuff that we were able to just say yes, and we were giving away water. There was nothing anybody need. And so I think some of what like mercy and justice looks like is being able to wade into the mess in a humble way to say, like, we're not trying to get credit. We just want to be a conduit for grace and truth and help where it's needed. So, I mean, you were a huge part of that too. What would you say?
Well, one of the things that was so neat about that time, because it was just like so lightning fast, like, oh, and we're open as a distribution center. And I mean, we were able to resource 900 families in 3.5 days. It was just a whirlwind of work, and the volunteers, I mean, I believe there was over 1,000 volunteers during those 4 days. But what was cool was that muscle had been developed. I mean, this was 6 years into the church, and already being able to like throw the special needs prom, which we call Night to Remember, which is usually about 2,000 volunteers, like on a great big scale. People at Mission were used to doing things with excellence, being able to have no strings attached, like even just to really care and be personal with people. They had experienced that. They had done that. So when it was like, we're going to open as a distribution center, we knew there was an army of volunteers that were like at a high capacity, trained and knew how to step in, and we're going to be great. And so I think had we not had that resource, the people resource that had already been used to volunteering and serving the community over 6 years, it would have felt like, I don't know, who are we going to get to do this?
Right.
So I think that was like so cool.
And even our place with other churches in our community, we just were trying to be a place that people could meet to talk about what was going on. So we held a lunch, and it was like all the kinds of nonprofits or the Salvation Army and different church leaders. And we just said, anyone who wants to come, we're just trying to figure out how we can do this better together. And we were in the conversation. We just hosted it. And then they're kind of looking at us like, well, just tell us what to do. And we weren't ready for that. Like we were, like, it kind of intimidated us in a good way of like, oh, I think we're supposed to step in to lead some of these things. So we ended up working with the school system. We created a community support team with a bunch of church leaders from our city. and went behind the scenes to the principals and the superintendent of our schools to say, when the kids go back to school, you're going to be on the front lines of knowing exactly who needs what. Let us be the community support team behind you, and we'll help resource all the needs that come towards the school system, and the school can get the credit for it. And our churches will own, different churches were owning different schools and helping behind the scenes with every need that came through, from like rent bills, utility bills, clothes, food. It was cool to see, and we got to be a lead part of that behind the scenes, and part of, like, I think it's a humble thing that we didn't get any credit for it on purpose. And then we were trying to help our team win, the churches win, the schools win, and we were trying to meet tangible needs.
Well, it's so neat because behind the scenes, really just superintendent and the principals knew. But this community task force was local pastors.
Right.
It was the church that had come together to be a community task force. But this form went home with every student in Ventura Unified the day they got back to school after the fires, any need. And every one of those forms came to mission, and that got distributed to these pastors and churches. And there wasn't like, oh, this church doesn't have enough money. It was like one pot. Like, whoever gets the credit gets the credit. We'll just meet every one of these needs until we run out of needs. So it was really, really, really neat.
And what was cool about that, if I can jump in just for a second, is that the pot in reality was mission. The funds came to mission from other churches around the country that just knew that they would help. So even though they didn't take credit for it, which they never will, there were churches around the country that just sent money directly to mission right off the bat, going, they'll know what to do with it. It was really cool to see that happen. Just churches helping other churches, and it was
super humbling. Honestly,
it was cool.
It was cool.
I was eating at a restaurant downtown Ventura, and my wife and I are very involved in Mission Church, although I teach at other churches. We were sitting there, and the girl struck up a conversation with us, the server did, and she goes, "Now, you're not from here, are you?" Because we had a little bit of an accent. But my wife got a big accent. And they said, "No, we moved here from Kentucky." And they said, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here from Kentucky?" So our kids came out to plant a new church, and we kind of came out to help them a little bit. And she goes, "What church is that?" I said, "Well, it's called Mission Church." She goes, "Oh, that's the church that helps people." That's all she knew about mission. She goes, "Oh, they're the ones that throw that like party for the special needs kids, and they became a distribution center for the Thomas Fire victims." And oh yeah, that's that church that helps people, right? Yeah. And I thought that's kind of cool. They didn't know anything about the teaching or the worship she just knew that that's the church that helps people. So that's a pretty cool reputation to have.
And I want to drill down on something that you guys said that Mike just pointed out, and that is that you guys have become known as a church that helps people. But when you're just planting a church, no one knows who you are. No one knows that you're helping anybody. And for everybody watching that might be a church planter, I mean, the success that you guys have had is not common. All right, to be able to, I mean, first of all, just the blessing alone, which I'm still a little bitter about because I've done church in a movie theater. You guys are given a theater, basically, given a tutor time in the parking lot to do children's ministry, and I'm happy for you.
I can hear it.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Okay? No, seriously, what you guys experienced was so incredible, and the incredible growth you've experienced as well. Other church planners are looking at this going, oh, this must be easy. But you had made a decision from the very beginning, we're going to be a kind of church that helps people. I think about the movie nights that you did before the church even started, and I think about a strategic decision that your executive pastor, Jim Sheldon, made, which was to become the chaplain for the police department there. Talk about some of those decisions and some of the other ones we may not even know about that began to be this way of showing people we are here to help.
Yeah, I think we want to be for the city. We're not antagonistic to the city. And I think sometimes planters can come in with the posture of like, the good news is here.
Yep.
We are God's gift to this city, versus like, no, God's been working in your city way before you got there, and he'll be there way after you're gone. Mm-hmm. So let's come in with a humble posture of how can we help? And I think sometimes we have big dreams that we want to solve every problem, but as planters, we can't solve every problem, but we can help our city. And where does our city need help? And so leading with the posture of what can we do? And so we can throw a party for our city, a free party for families. Jim jumped into like the chaplain, and it's been a huge blessing. Like he loves it. The city loves him. Like it's been a cool thing to watch him gain influence that way. I think if you come in going like, what's our city's biggest problems and how can we help? And who are the servants of the city that we could help serve? Because a lot of times servants don't get recognized or supported from our community. So let's jump in behind the scenes that way. And then be people of good news. Like Christians aren't bringing good news very much or help, right? So let's be that and go from there. I mean, we've watched that.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, I mean, the parties like in the park that we did, which we still do every summer, but that was just like showing our community like no strings attached. This is just free, just because we love being here, we love our community, and just hoping that people would experience that. Like, oh, you just really did this. Cool, this is awesome. So just the no strings attached became a thing. Like we're doing this with no strings attached just because we're wanting to move towards people, and just be full of joy and be helpful. And then developing the relationships with community partners, as Mike was saying, like God's already been at work. There are great organizations in your community. Finding those and figuring out like where you resonate, and still every month we go, and we have for the last 7 years, to a local organization and say, what do you need? How can we help? And usually that's through item of the month. They'll say, we need cleaning supplies. This is the maternity home for homeless pregnant women. And so for all month, that's all we're collecting is cleaning supplies. And the church, that muscle of like, oh, we asked, how can we help? This is what they said, so we're going to meet it. And and the people that actually that ministry will serve don't know that it came from Mission Church. They know that this ministry is helping them, but we're able to resource different ministries in the community just by asking the question, like, is there anything you need? How could we help? Because this is simple. Collecting peanut butter or collecting paper towels, this is a simple thing we can do. But the gesture of just like, asking the question to a local partner is huge, because the favor within the city and within the nonprofits, it really does allow you to become a place that when something happens, it's like, well, let's look to them. They've asked us already 20 times, what can we do to help? So let's go there.
It's the different posture of walking in going, here I am as the church, and then like, no, there you are as an organization that God has been using. How can we help you win? I think, Give One is something that we stole that idea, where we took $1 for everybody in attendance. From the week one, we counted everybody that was there, and we assumed everybody was giving $1 more than they would normally give. And with those collective dollars, we're trying to figure out, okay, where can we do good in our community? And to be able to tell the stories of like every dollar makes a difference, and we're going to find good and organizations to partner with and people to help, and single moms, and help people get into recovery and help put food on a table, that it really does tangibly matter that we help. We didn't have language for it until a couple years in, when we said, like, what do we love about our church? And throw great parties became one of them. And it's trying to put language around, we want to be people of good news that are generous to our community and throw great parties. So,
okay, let me ask about that. And Breaux, I'd love to hear from you on this, because you have been a part of multiple churches and you've seen many, many churches. There are so many opportunities that people could be involved with at a church. And a church could use the item of the month, or the Give One, or we throw great parties, or we work with this organization or that. What are you noticing about churches that really do it well? Do they just decide to pick a few, or do they try to be everything to everybody, or is it just kind of germane to their culture, or how'd you guys decide that, and what are you seeing there?
I think it's a lot to do with providential relationships that come your way. You can't be all things to all people. You can't help everybody, but you can help some, and you have to decide, what are we called to do? Who do we know that we trust that's God's just providentially put in our path, and we're gonna work with them. Like, I was a part of a church that when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, there was just a guy that was at a church where a family in our church used to vacation, and our church became we're up in the Chicago area, and we became like the largest distribution center on the Gulf Coast, just because of a providential relationship. So it's not like, what can we do to help? It's like, well, we got that guy, we know that guy. It's just, I think things like that happen in churches. Would you take advantage of those, not by accident relationships you have, and saying that's where we're going to serve. And I think it is. I think it's more effective to narrow it down to a few things you do well and work with people that God's put in your path. That's what I've noticed anyway.
We have a value that we talk about bullets than cannonballs. It's not ours, it's Jim Collins, but like bullets are cheap. So fire bullets early. Like you can be really accurate with them. You can figure out, and where is God working? Where's the return on investment? Do some things early on that don't have to be big and splashy, but fire some bullets. And then when you figure out the impact and figure out the thing that's working and God seems to be using, then move the big cannon to where that area is and fire a huge shot at it. And I think sometimes I watch church plants, they try to fire cannons quickly, and they're trying to fire 5 cannonballs, and they don't know how to do any of them very well because it's too soon, because they haven't fired enough bullets yet. So fire the bullets first, and then when you find the impact, move the cannon to it.
And this is not a sweeping critique of people that do that. It's just that, when Jesus said, "Let your light so shine so that they will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Sometimes we do them as marketing strategies. We'll shoot cannonballs so that people will see, hey, we're here. You see our church helping people? That's just the wrong motivation for it. You don't do it ever as a marketing strategy. You do it as God leads you to help, to genuinely just help, so that they will see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.
I think something too, this is probably just unique to our context, but could relate to some other people too. Where we're at in Ventura, when we launched Mission, are the big 3 words that we had all over everything and still do is hope for everyone. And I mean, if you're printing that and advertising that, you better be ready to believe that. And we prayed for God to bring us people hurting, broken, addicted, lost, that don't feel like they could belong in a church, to walk in the doors. And so and that's who started showing up. And then we realized, like, man, we've developed now a relationship with recovery programs. So do we have the opportunity to open our building? So AA and NA meet every day of the week in the building to say, like, it just has become a place, like, even if I don't attend church, they open their doors for us to meet here. Several funerals in our community when someone is overdosed, when there's been, like, we recently had a boating tragedy with a really young girl, and it's like they don't attend Mission, but first call is like, will you open your doors? We're used to coming there when we're hurting or we need help or we need a meeting, or so that's been just I think again the muscle of saying yes. Like, sure, we actually opened the doors of our new facility for a funeral before we opened for a weekend service this past September.
I think one of the great questions that church leaders sometimes fail to ask, and it's a simple question, and I've heard it's not original with me at all, but it's a question we had to ask: if our church folded up and left town, would the city notice? And sadly enough, a lot of churches go, no, they wouldn't notice at all. And that's where you kind of start how do we make a difference in this city? So.
A phrase that's really sticky that I've heard I don't know if you stole it or made it or whatever, but to love on our community until they ask why, or to serve our community until they ask why. I think, like, if I was planting all over again or encouraging a church or a church planter, I'd be like, where is it that your community would go, wow, that kind of generosity, that kind of humility, that kind of servanthood or love around a key issue makes me wonder, like, why would you do this? Like, because we talk about it all the time, like, people may not believe what we believe as the church. That's like, but I would love for them to go, like, I don't know if I believe what they believe about God or Jesus or the Bible, but man, if our city needs help, those people from Mission are like crazy helpful and serve our city's greatest needs. I think that's a good reputation.
And you're seeing just how this works, of you extend justice and then you have an opportunity to extend mercy, and that's all based on humility. Something I find interesting here is the dynamic between you two, because you planted a church 25 years ago?
Yep, 25.
In Las Vegas, and you were in middle school when that was going on. So you're watching all this, and now you're doing it again. What did you learn from mom and dad doing that about this is just how we do life? We've moved out to Las Vegas with people we don't even know, and you're seeing crazy stories some are really good and some are really tragic. And what are you sharing at home to make sure your kids, because all your kids are involved in ministry now, what are you sharing at home to make sure they cultivate a love for justice, mercy, humility that you're extending? And what did you see? What did you catch through all that?
Well, I mean, so much. I think that, like, first of all, I was 12 years old when we moved. I was the oldest of 3 kids when we moved to Vegas to plant from rural Kentucky. And I think that part of that, what was so cool in that move was our parents were really clear, like, God isn't calling us or Dad to plant a church. He's calling our family into this obedience. So from the get-go, we had to weigh in. We got a voice in it. We got to talk about it, and really felt like there's not a reason that, like, my dad's here. There's a reason I'm here, that our family's here. Like, we felt all in, and that's why we were unloading the U-Haul and setting up the chairs in the YMCA. And our parents, I know that they protected us from some stories and church drama and all that. I'm grateful for that. But they didn't protect us from messy stories of life change. And so in our home, we got to see, the wine goddess from Caesar's Palace hanging out on Sunday afternoon with her, little boy. And we got to watch transformation happen in people's lives. And we knew their story. Like, we knew he was an addict, and we knew that he had been kicked out of his house. And here they were in our home. And almost just that sense of, like, even if someday I rebel or question my beliefs, I've almost seen too much. Like, I've just seen God do this incredible thing in people's lives because my parents let us see it. They didn't shelter us from that part of the church, which was such a beautiful thing, which I think has just kind of been in my heartbeat, in my veins ever since, like, to experience watching people come to know Jesus. So yeah, I don't know. I probably could say a whole lot more about that, but
yeah, it was, planting a church was one of the greatest thrills of my life, being involved in the church in Vegas, and still have a real soft spot in my heart for the people of Las Vegas. And we always, like as Jodi said, we were living in rural Kentucky, and got the call to go to Vegas. I'm thinking, Vegas, wow, Sin City, but we always refused to call it Sin City. We just called it the City of Grace because, Scripture says where sin abounds, grace abounds that much more. So we want to bring that hope for everyone mentality to that church plant, and what God did in people's lives wrecked me forever, taught me about the grace of God in ways I'd never been taught in my life. And so I went back to Kentucky to transition a church, which was so much harder than planting a church. And not saying that either one's easy, but I went back with a changed heart about the grace of God and how it really was hope for everybody, even game-playing religious people in the Bible Belt that I used to be. And that was one of those experiences where God just put me back into where I grew up to say, there really is hope for everyone. Come out from hiding and admit your brokenness and admit your need for God. And man, God could just transform your life. And it was cool to see Him do that there, just as He did in Las Vegas. The thing that I would say I sheltered our kids from were from the Pharisees. We didn't care about them seeing all these messy life stories because we wanted them to see the transformational grace of God at work in people's lives. But I didn't bring the criticism home. I tried not to do that because I got plenty of it. Some churches have those pews or seats with the prayer cards, connect cards in the back. I got a bunch of prayer requests on Monday morning. Take your traveling circus back to Vegas where you belong, and that kind of stuff, because we were changing things. And but in the midst of all that, I received a lot of criticism and a lot of hate mail type stuff. Just decided I'm not bringing any of that home. My wife didn't even know about it. I had a small group of guys, and I would go whine and moan and complain to them, and they would get my head on straight and give me courage to go back in and kind of fight the good fight, so to speak. But I just determined, I'm not bringing that stuff home. That's one thing my kids will never see, that side of the church, because they just didn't need to see that side. I wanted them to see the side of God working, because such a difference between God working in people's lives and I don't know, I rambled on enough. So sorry.
Well, no, I would just, as a son-in-law, I would say, like, I've watched him and I've watched his kids, and he's the same at home. He's the same guy as he is on the stage always. Like, there's never been a game that he's played on character or bravado or charisma. And I've watched him still to this day. Like, his primary favorite role is being their dad and Debbie's husband. And he never let the pastoral role usurp the primary role that he's played in their lives. And so he's been at games, he's at grandkids' games. Like, it's never been where I'm really important and they need me to go teach, versus like, no, I'd rather be home and lead well at home. It's been it's cool. It's been a challenge in a good way of us.
It seems like, and this is kind of where our story picked up, was when you moved to Kentucky. And I was there for a couple of years under the founding pastor, and then you come in to take over, which was just an amazing thing to watch. But
amazing is one word.
To watch someone else receive all the criticism. Oh, he took a shot there. But seeing the way you handled that with such grace and humility, and I know that it had to bug you, and I know you had a group of guys to help you process that. But how do you come in and change a culture that had prided itself on being right and it's like everything we grew up with church. It was the place where you come to me, that mentality. And we're going to legislate morality, and we're going to work on politics, and we're going to be the voice in our community for those things to protect the gospel, however you want to say it. Not even the gospel, the values we believe the gospel upholds. And you come in radically wrecked by what happened in Vegas and try to change our mindset to have more mercy and humility. And I saw it from my seat, but talk to us from a leader's perspective. How do you do that? Because there's some people out there that they're transitioning a church, or they're leading a church, and they're transitioning in their own mentality of trying to be more focused on mercy and humility and justice. How do you convey that to everybody?
Wow, I don't think I really know, honestly, other than just try to implement it in your own life. If you're a person preaching, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, but you're not trying to do the right thing and not trying to give mercy away and not walking humbly with God, you're going to have a hard time leading the place that way. So I think first of all, it comes back to your own life, and I had to be real introspective during that time of leadership to go, am I living like Jesus, The other thing is you can't be afraid to take the shots. It's going to happen. It's just human nature, and just that's part of doing the right thing. It's just the right direction to go, to take our church outside the walls, to reach the needs of our city, and to reach people that are far from God. We've got to do that. I cast that vision over and over and over and over with a variety of different ways, but I always try to weave it in. And then one of the practical things we did, 1 year, pretty soon into the transition, the whole year, just you helped me. We preached on Jesus for a year. What he did, what he said, who he hung out with, the whole year was, every week we talk about Jesus, but this was a real clever series. We're going to talk about Jesus for the whole year, and that's what we did. And I think that was transformational in the life of the church, going, oh, that's who we're supposed to model? That's what we're supposed to be like? He never did this or this or this like we thought he did. He did this and this and this. It was, I think, just from a leadership standpoint, just those things were helpful.
One of my favorite stories that I love to tell was soon after, and I don't even know if you remember this, soon after you got there, you had You had covered up the stained glass windows. You'd moved the.
I didn't do that.
Well, not physically. Okay, the order came from.
They were already there,
from the
and I just
office.
left them.
The choir was minimalized. The worship team was on stage. I mean, this is mid '90s, so you're getting us from about 1975 to 1995 in a course of 6 days. And it was awesome. And, just the radical transformation in people's lives. And we're seeing people get baptized over the next few months. And it was incredible. But there was an elders meeting coming up. Well, not just elders, but board meeting. Okay. So it's going to be all 100 of us.
150 men.
150 men. And they're not all happy because you've hurt their friends or them or whatever by some of these changes.
And I'm not wearing a tie.
And you're not wearing a tie. That's right.
Scandalous.
Yeah. But you went to the band collar first for a while, and then the jacket.
Oh, man.
The jacket went away. Anyway,
I had those
now you wear shorts.
pictures. Yeah.
So you come into the board meeting that night with your guitar, 12-string. Not many play those anymore. And you start playing Amazing Grace. And you'd play a verse, and you'd look at the guys and go, "Somebody tell me your grace story." You remember this?
No, I really don't remember it.
Seriously? Oh, man.
Yeah.
And somebody would tell how they came to Christ, and you do another verse. Somebody tell me your grace story. Somebody tell. This wasn't planned. These weren't, like we do in student ministry of I need a few people to get the, prime the pump. And the whole culture of the room changed because they began to view things from where they were before they came to Christ as opposed to the gatekeepers that they had become. And I have never forgotten that story. Obviously, you've blown right by it. But it was so transformational for me to think about that is what it's all about. It's all about grace and how we extend that to other people. And it was just one of the greatest privileges of my life to follow you and to learn from you. So here we are now, latter part of 2018, 19, whenever you're watching this. Church is changing rapidly. And it's a good thing because of the Me Too movement, the Church Too movement, the fall of certain pastors that we used to, revere and say, that's the way you lead. And now servant leadership is finally taking its place. Justice, mercy, humility seems like if you're going to, have a methodology for how to do church, boy, that just seems so perfect. Where do you think we go from here as the church? What does America need? What does the country need? What does the world need for us to finally do to leverage those three things in the church going forward?
Okay, well, I may not answer this well, but one of the things that just is coming to my mind is, we should all know this if we're following Jesus, but for whatever reason, it's easy to forget or lose sight of, and that is that it's cost us something to seek justice and to give mercy and to walk humbly. I mean, I think that teaching that to people who are coming to Christ, like there's this thing that we hold on to, like, okay, it better not cost me anything. Like, I hope it works for me. Hope I get happier. Hope it works some things out in my marriage, but it just better not cost me anything. And I think that, like, understanding, like, the sacrifice, it's going to cost you time to really love people. It's going to cost you time to pursue injustices in this world. It's going to cost you, it's going to cost you relationally. It's sometimes going to break your heart, when someone relapses again that you've been walking alongside of. But this whole idea of like, it better not cost me anything is just so not the way of Jesus. Because he said, take up your cross, follow me. He said, it's going to cost me everything to bring hope and love into this world. So it's going to cost you too. And I know that's not like a big flashy statement that we usually put on the outside of our churches, like, welcome, it's going to cost you something.
Hope for everyone, but it's going to cost you.
Something. But I think like changing that culture to understand what a privilege it is when you think about, even the older brother in the prodigal son story, Tim Keller's book, Prodigal God, I don't know if you've read that, but he talks about this idea of the older brother just being so upset that this was going to cost him something. The younger brother being welcomed back into the family, that meant part of his inheritance was blown. Mm-hmm. Dad's just letting him back, and a true older brother, those of us that have been following Jesus, we've had access to God all along. It should be our, you know what? I don't care what it costs me. I'm going after this. I'm going to give mercy where it needs to be. I'm going to seek justice. I'm going to walk so humbly with God and so right beside Jesus that when the Holy Spirit says this way, I go this way. When the Holy Spirit whispers now, I go now. And so I think, I don't even know what I'm saying as far as the churches, but I just think that this shift, as you're saying, from everything will be up and to the right when you give your life to Jesus, to you're going to experience a real deep joy that you can't find anywhere else. But it's going to cost you something to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. But it is so worth it. It is so worth it for the sake of the world.
Yeah, I think it's embarrassing that servant leadership is a new idea. Like that's a huge critique on us as church leaders in our culture. Like, it should be the way, not new. And I think, leadership is, I heard this, disappointing people at a rate that they can stand. And I think if we're going to lean into these ideas, we've got to figure out who we're choosing to disappoint intentionally. Like, there's going to be people, no matter how much you live in the tension of humility and mercy and justice, you're going to disappoint people on all sides of it. They're not going to do enough justice for people, or you're going to do too much justice for people. You're going to be too merciful, and people are going to get mad at you, or you're not mercy enough, or you're too humble, or you're taking too much credit, or you're going to disappoint people. And so figuring out how to live out the tension and to be the right kind of person and lead right kind of churches that are those kind of people where they live, work, and play, I think is the way forward.
We're leading a bunch of guys to a little Bible study through Philippians. And these are guys that have never really read the Bible in their life. It's really fun. But Paul's got a really great transformational, one of the coolest transformational paragraphs in all the Bible is in Philippians 3, where Paul says, I used to be this, 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 this. He lists all these great religious credentials. And he goes, but now I just consider them garbage. And then he says, I just want to know Christ and the fellowship of his sufferings and to somehow attain the resurrection from the dead. We kind of like, I want to know Christ and I want to live forever. That whole fellowship and his sufferings, I don't know about that part, but the two bookends on that, I'm all about that. Yeah. But that fellowship of his sufferings, it's in there. If you are pursuing justice and mercy, it is going to cost you something, like Jodi said. It really is. And then you look back to what Jesus said in his very first sermon, that Sermon on the Mount, where he said, blessed are you, if you're a peacemaker. You're going to be seen as the children of God, because peacemakers have to take a risk and step in to make peace. Then he says, and blessed are you when you're persecuted for being a peacemaker, because rejoice and be glad. You already got your home in heaven. But that fellowship of his sufferings is something that I think the church is about to enter into in a way. I'm not being a prophet or anything here. I'm just saying we've been so much health, wealth, up and to the right, like you were saying. And when the church was at its best is when the church was persecuted. Constantine comes along and the Roman Empire says, everybody's a Christian. And church just got so diluted and went on a 2,000-year crash course. But when the church was just this organic, we just love Jesus and this guy that came back from the dead, we're going to follow him and live like he lived, and we're going to be known as people that love everybody. The church thrived in the midst of persecution. So I think there's something about that servant leadership, fellowship in his sufferings, if that's what it is. It's okay. That makes the church effective.
Yeah, I think the church is not gaining favor in our culture, and Acts 2 church had favor. And so I think as we're leading, going like, okay, how do we create movements of people that are following Jesus and gaining favor in a way that's not compromising morality and developing character, but not trying to just be right and make everybody else right and believe what they believe, but more of like, how do we come in as those humble servants that are trying to be kind and good and pointing a way towards hope. Like there's a hope for a better life. I think the church is bad positioned when we are trying to make everybody believe what we believe, then we can be okay with you. Like, it never works that way. Like, why would we expect non-believers to act like believers? It doesn't work. We want to bring the hope and kindness and goodness of Jesus that only he can offer and lead that way. And hopefully we'll gain favor and add to the number daily those who are being saved. But I think we think somehow if we can get them to believe right first, then we'll add to our numbers daily those who can be saved.
Yeah. So, love them till they ask why.
Yep.
That's a great way to stop. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Man, love
It's
it.
fantastic.
Thank you.